In this video, I'll be going over the classic physique competitors who are the worst in each body part. This is obviously influenced by my own opinion, so feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions down below. And remember that this is purely criticism and not a, attack on anyone in any sort of way. I'll also be only focusing on top competitors in the division, such as the top 15 or those who competed most recently in classic, since outside of that range, there are so many competitors that would fit the bill for being bad in each muscle I'll be talking about. Starting off with the biceps, we have Urs Kalesinski. For as good as his overall physique is, his biceps have always stood out as a weakness. There's barely any separation in the heads, no deep fiber detail, and the inner arm separation kind of blends together. Now, on top of that, the peak is kind of lackluster, and with the shorter insertions he has, the development has not really matched up to the rest of his body. The result is an underwhelming look, especially when you put him in the front double biceps next to other competitors like Ramon Dino, where everything else about his frame does look good, but then you look at the biceps and they're pretty bad. Now, Chris Bumstead gets an honorable mention here as well. He has similar insertions, but the difference is in the development. I would say that Chris Bumstead's biceps have way more detail and look far better from the side and rear. To me, these two have the weakest biceps overall, though, at the top level of the division, but feel free to let me know down below if you disagree. Next up are the triceps, and here I've got to go with Josema Beast or Jose Manuel. From the side, his triceps really do flatten out, especially in the side chest, where you want to see that round sweep hanging off the arm. From behind, they are not terrible, I'd say, but they are nothing special and are basically average at best. The real issue here is from the front. His peaky biceps completely overshadow the triceps, making the imbalance even more obvious. And then you add the lack of inner arm detail, and the overall triceps don't really look that impressive compared to the rest of his frame. It's one of those weaknesses that definitely stands out the higher up he places, and in my opinion is one of the most glaring in a pose like the front double. Moving on to the forearms, I've got Josema again. Just like with his triceps, the forearms are kind of lackluster. They really do lack the size and the fullness, and at times they do look almost stringy, I'd say, compared to the rest of the arm. Now, to be fair, Josema's arms as a whole are not the most impressive on stage, so that might make the forearms look a bit worse than they actually are, but to me, they've always come across as mediocre at best, never really popping or completing his arm development. I'm sure there are other top guys out there with average forearms, but when I think of forearms and weaknesses in the same sentence, I would definitely say Josema comes to my mind, and he's the one that stands out. And when we talk about the overall arm package, the name that really stands out to me is Urs Kalesinski. We already went over his biceps, but the triceps are really not much better. They don't bring really anything special in terms of insertion, development, or detail. Even his forearms are really not that impressive in size, which adds to the imbalance. His arms have always been a severe weakness, and that never really changed even up until his final showing in 2024. Now, Urs has since transitioned to the open division, but because his last classic appearance was on the Olympia stage, and he is definitely one of the biggest names in the division, I think it's important to include him here. Simply put, I think his arms have always been one of the biggest criticisms on his physique. Honestly, they were even more of an obvious weakness than Chris Bumstead's early arms ever were, and when I think about the most problematic arms in this division, no other name comes to my mind more than Urs Kalesinski's, which is why he's here. Also, if you guys are enjoying the video so far, a like and sub would really be awesome, as it helps out the channel tremendously. Now let's move on to the quads, and for this one I actually have two names, starting with Breon Ainsley. Breon's quads have definitely become lackluster over time, mainly due to age. As you get older, the limbs tend to lose size, and with Breon, you can especially see that in his outer quad sweep. His masterful posing definitely hides it well, but once you notice it, the quads almost fall straight down with very little bowing outward. The detail is still excellent, and for his age, they are far from terrible, but compared to the rest of his physique and the lineup, the sweep is definitely not what it used to be. Now, Josema is another name here, and his situation is interesting because he is one of the youngest competitors in the division, yet his quad sweep is surprisingly mediocre. The outer quad sweep barely bows outward at all, and even the vastus medialis, the teardrop, head, isn't particularly impressive either. The detail he has is pretty solid, but the overall shape really hurts his X-frame and makes his legs look much weaker and flatter than they should. Two very different reasons, but in both cases, cases, the quads end up being clear weaknesses. Next up are the hamstrings, and this one would go to Wesley Vissers. For as dominant as his upper body really is, his hamstrings are absolutely lackluster and are easily one of the weakest, if not the worst, in the division. It's a real shame too, because if he had strong hamstrings to match his back, for example, the delts as well, and the arms, his rear double biceps could arguably be the best in the division. But instead, there's barely any separation, and even when he's fully dialed in, the size and development are severely behind. Honestly, at times they do look even amateur-esque compared to the rest of his physique, and I don't want to sound overly critical, but this isn't even my own opinion. Even head judges have pointed out that his hamstrings are the area holding him back the most. For someone with so much potential, in my own opinion, it is the one major area that keeps him from being really untouchable. Sticking with Wesley Vissers, we've got the calves. As we just saw with the hamstrings, the calves are another glaring weakness on his physique, basically non-existent at this point. What's interesting is that back in, 2020, I'd say, his calves actually looked very solid, maybe even above average. But now they've completely lost that pop and fullness and kind of atrophied away. It even adds on to that lackluster look of his lower body now and throws off the imbalance that you kind of don't want to see in classic physique, where the proportions really are off. Calves might not be the most important part of bodybuilding today, but when you're judging the total package, they definitely do matter to some extent, and in my eyes, Wesley definitely has the worst in the division. Now we come to the legs as a whole, and this one definitely has to go to Wesley Vissers. You probably saw this one coming. With the weakest hamstrings in the division and calves that are basically non-existent, it's already a tough spot to be in. But when you add in the quads that can look pretty average at best, especially if he comes in on the flatter side, and the glutes as well that do not match his frame either, it all combines into a lower body that does not stack up against his incredible upper half. In classic physique, balance is key, and when you have such a dominant chest, back, and shoulders and arms, the legs really do stand out as a major gap if they are lagging behind. If Wesley's legs were anywhere near the level of his upper body, he could very well be unbeatable, but instead they are definitely what holds him back the most. In my opinion, that makes his lower body, I'd say, the weakest in the entire division and at the entire top level of classic physique. Now let's talk about the midsection, and here I've got 3 names to bring up. Starting with Josema, he's got a wider midsection and naturally wider hips, which gives him a blockier waist. To his credit, the abs themselves are very solid, and the serratus and obliques are really detailed and dialed in thanks to his crazy condition. But the waist size is really what holds him back from having the tight classic look. Then we have Michael DeBoule. His midsection is not the worst by any means, but it is definitely mediocre. The waist is not particularly small or chiseled or tapered, the abs and the surrounding muscles are not especially deep or stand out, and overall nothing about the midsection screams amazing. But honestly, the competitor who I think has the weakest midsection at the top level has got to be Wesley Vissers. I've said this many times, but he has a kind of awkward ribcage shape that looks angular and almost protrudes when he hits it in a vacuum, and then his abs are not really developed very well, nor are they super symmetrical or really detailed as well, and on top of that he has a hernia, which thankfully he just fixed, but it used to stand out very badly. Add in a blocky, wide waist, and it really hurts the flow of his overall physique. And if we're being very thorough here, I'll throw in an honorable mention to Eric Wildberger. He's not really a top 15 guy right now, but his midsection is even worse than anyone I've mentioned. Very, very wide waist, uneven abs, and an ab split that really does not look too nice. But among the real contenders here, I would definitely have Wesley Vissers as the weakest midsection right now. Next, we've got the chest, and first up is Livingston Lavinho. His chest has always looked a little bit off to me, with mediocre insertions and a slightly awkward split down the middle that does not quite fill out in the way that you would expect. It's hard to describe, but when you look at pictures, you can definitely see what I'm talking about. On top of that, it's not fully developed compared to his other body parts, which are all outstanding. Maybe apart from his back, though, but you know what I mean. To me, it's not really something that will hold him back in the long run, because he is so genetically gifted everywhere else, but it is definitely the weakest body part on his physique right now, maybe after his back. Then we have Matheus Menegacci. Structurally, he's got a prettier and more genetically gifted chest insertion, but the problem here is that it's so flat and underdeveloped. There's a real lack of size and thickness, and it has definitely become more and more obvious as he has gotten bigger in other areas, and is definitely more obvious when he's on the flatter side. Now, Matheus is still a newer pro, I would say, and has definitely made a ton of progress. His back, which used to be a big weakness, has come up, considerably, I'd say, but the chest itself is still way behind, and in my opinion, it's actually a bigger weakness compared to someone like Levinho. Now let's move on to the back, starting with Matt Grego. To his credit, he's definitely brought up his back a lot in the recent years, but you can still see that it does need a bit more thickness in the lower back, where it is still kind of weak. From behind, he could also use a little bit more width. Interestingly, from the front, his lats actually flare out pretty well, but once he turns around, they do look a lot more flat. More width and density would completely change the look of his rear double, for example, and make him a whole lot more competitive. Then there's Horse MD. His lats from the front are already kind of mediocre, but from behind they are even worse, and the whole back lacks thickness and density. In the rear lat spread, which is not a mandatory pose, he does pose it effectively to hide this weakness, but the moment he hits a rear double in comparisons, the weakness really shows, and he does fall behind a lot. Honestly, his back is probably the worst among the top competitors right now. And finally, we have Urs Kalesinski, who I would call the weakest back at the absolute highest level. There's barely any separation, the development is uneven, the size is not really there, and he still lacks a lot of that true width. At the 2024 Olympia, standing next to Chris Bumstead, Ramon Dino, or of course Mike Sommerfeld, he definitely got outclassed in the back. For all of his strengths, it is still the one area that holds him back, in my opinion, the most against the best of the best. Finally, we've got the shoulders, and this is probably the hardest category to call because most guys in classic physique already have pretty strong shoulders. But if I had to single someone out, I'd probably go with Urs Kalesinski. Now, don't get me wrong, his delts are not bad. From the front and from the side, they do look pretty solid, and in poses like the front lat spread, they actually complement his structure and overall muscularity very well, giving him a balanced and refined look with very clean separation as well. The issue really does come up when you start comparing him to the very best in the division. In shots like the rear double biceps, for example, the delts just don't have that intricate fiber detail and deep separation that you see in someone like Breon, Wesley, or even Ramon Dino. They flatten out a bit and lose that roundness, and without that pop, his upper body does not quite look nearly as complete. To be clear, this is not a case of bad genetics or sight enhancements blurring things out, at least in my opinion. It just seems like his delts never reached that next level of fullness or density. So while they are far from terrible compared to the highest standard in the division, Urs's shoulders are the most average and, in my opinion, the weakest of the group. Anyways guys, that about does it for this video. Please let me know in the comments down below your thoughts and opinions, and please do not take it all too seriously. With that being said, I will see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.